This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of defendingutah.org, and we are back on K-Talk Radio, AM 630, k-talk.com, with the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Don't forget to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. You can also find us on Spreaker, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.
Welcome back to the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. I'm Sherilyn Eager with Enoch Moore. And this is the Naked Truth Day with defendingutah.org. And we are in moments going to be speaking with Art Thompson, the CEO of the John Birch Society. And the topic is the nationalization of police. Now, I don't need to remind you or reiterate all of the rhetoric and provocateurism and propaganda surrounding the pattern we are seeing of protests and violence, and now Black Lives Matters, and now the new Black Panthers, and it goes on and on. But there is a purpose to all things. And so, Enoch?
To everything there is, you almost sounded like the Bible there for a second.
To everything
there's a
season,
okay.
And a time and purpose under heaven.
So,
as Saul Alinsky put it, his allegiance was to Lucifer and anarchy, right?
He called him the greatest revolutionary that we should give a nod to, and he dedicated his book. And it is that the philosophy of that book that was dedicated to Lucifer that is being followed in all these protests that are eventually leading to this nationalization of police force. And we have seen here just in Utah local moves to regionalize and work towards the nationalization of police. We discussed that a little bit earlier, but we have the Unified Police Department in Salt Lake that they're grouping together all the different municipalities under a private regional police force. And we have seen, again, we have an article on our site, defendingutah.org, on the endgame of federal involvement in local Utah police. And we've interviewed sheriffs and police officers who have told us about the training they're getting from federal agencies. And they talk about how, they train us about when the people are the enemy, constitutionalists are the enemy, and all these grants of militarization equipment that are coming down. And these are all federal programs. That's the key. When we're upset about officers and these police brutality videos that come out, like the little ones, sometimes there's a little guy who got it on his cell phone, and clearly, okay, the cop is doing something. But our investigation at Defending Utah showed that behavior is stemming from these federal training programs. And our guest, Art Thompson, is a longtime expert and knows the big picture history of this all the way back to the 60s, when the exact same thing the Black Panthers and Black Lives Matters are doing now was done then.
Before you were born, but I was there. I was a kid in Hollywood, California. It was nasty.
Yeah, and there's a great film by the John Birch Society called Anarchy USA that kind of shows the tactics used of dividing the people and creating the appearance of revolution. And it's a really good film. You know, a liberal would call it racist because you're saying the civil rights movement had ulterior motives, but it's really ridiculous.
I still see those images in my mind. Our home was in the Hollywood Hills, and I remember seeing the orange light over Watts.
What was that? Was that haze from tear gas?
No, it was all the fire.
The fire? Oh,
the fire
from the riots.
At night, from the riots in Watts.
And those were planned. And it came out over the next 15, 20 years. All that was a planned strategy to nationalize our police force, which eventually became so commonly understood that it was planned that the whole movement died in the legislature, I believe, around the 70s. And our guest, Art Thompson, can probably speak to some more of those details historically. But Art Thompson, welcome to the show. You there? Wait.
Now he is
now
there.
He's here.
Hi.
Art Thompson. Okay.
Okay.
Now we gotcha.
That's great. Glad to be here.
So Art, you're the CEO of the John Birch Society, and you have a lot of insight into what's going on the nationalization of police and the historical context, which we really ought to learn from and recognize this is something we've dealt with before, and it would have really the same or very similar solutions. Can you talk to that?
Yes. Well, actually, what we are witnessing is the same things that were going on in the 60s and 70s, with the same organizations behind it and everything else.
I want to endorse what you're saying, Art, because as you probably heard, I'm old enough and I was there.
Yeah.
My dad was a doctor in Hollywood, and he actually knew a lot of people in that community that were card carrying. And I remember us watching TV, and he would say, okay, that person is a communist, I know him. And that was my Americana.
Yep. And if you take a look at the background of this fellow who just, shot these people in Dallas, he was part of the communist apparatus as well. And we haven't been able to really document everything, but we're trying to piece some things together. We think there were other people involved, not in the shooting necessarily, but in setting the stage for him to get away with what he was doing. But getting back to the overall picture, whether you're talking about Revcom.us or the Red Nation or Black Lives Matter or any of these organizations, they do have a common antecedent, and that is communism. In fact, Black Lives Matter is more revitalized acorn that was really based on Saul Alinsky's program than anything else. And so you see these things happening all over the country, and they're dividing the people two ways. The first way they're dividing the people is the pro-police and the anti-police. And the anti-police are in a very small minority, and they create problems that the police have to take care of. And the people looking at it on the media and in their neighborhoods and like you did on the horizon with the red glow of the fires, they want more police. So the people in the top echelons of our government are more than happy to give us more police. In fact, there is a connection between the streets, what's going on there, and even into the White House. And this was always the case. And the police are caught in the middle. It's a little worse this time than it was in the 60s and 70s because in addition to that, a lot of your major cities have been taken over by the communist apparatchik.
I agree, Art, and I also believe because we have such good communication over the internet, things are happening globally. You probably are noticing that yourself, right?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's true. But at any rate, so the police are caught between a rock and a hard place. They're caught between the street violence and their own bosses in City Hall in some cases, or in the federal government in others, where they can't do their job. They're not allowed to stop the violence before it gets out of hand. We've seen that in Baltimore and Ferguson and other places. But on the other side of this equation, by the way, relative to the street violence, it's rare that the local citizens are burning down their own neighborhoods. Look, nobody's going to burn down their own house and the store on the corner where they buy their beer and their smokes. That's started by outsiders coming in to do the job. Now, that's not to say that local people don't get involved in looting in the spur of the moment. They do. But that's after the violence starts. But the other way they're dividing the country, so let me reiterate very briefly. They're dividing the country into those that want less police and those that want more police. The ones that want more police are the vast majority, and they're being suckered into a federalization of police in the name of the local police not being able to handle the situation. That's what they're trying to do. In other words, my little town, my city is being overwhelmed. I don't know that these are outsiders coming in. All I know is I see what's happening in the streets. I want more law and order. And so more law and order comes on in, and the federal government starts doing things that they have no prerogative to do, including investigating the local police instead of the demonstrators. But then there's another division that's going on, and this was something that was installed by Stalin back in the 1930s, and it still is pervasive today, but it's still behind the scenes, and unless you're really involved in the communist movement, you're not aware of it. I'm looking right now at a 1932 poster to vote communist. William Z. Foster and James W. Ford were running for president and vice president on the communist ticket. And the top of the poster says equal rights for Negroes everywhere, and then they say self-determination for the black belt. In other words, what they wanted to do was to have the black belt, the so-called Deep South, to break off from the United States and be run by the Negro Soviet Republic, as they called it in those days. And that was a main deal in the civil rights movement, but it was buried within the leadership of the civil rights movement, to where the average citizen didn't see it. Now you jump forward to today, and you look at Breitbart, for instance, had an article that was called "New Black Panther Leader: Blacks Need to Migrate to 5 Southern States, form country within a country." And it's the same deal that they had, that Stalin had as a plan back in the 30s.
And in the
so
60s,
you see all of this thing coming about again.
That was
as we go forward, you're going to see more and more of the communist apparatus involved in all of this stuff.
Yeah, we saw this article, and I had your very same thoughts, and then I went out to this. Now we have the resurgence of the Black Panther Party, and they're calling themselves the New Black Panther Party. Art Thompson, who you're an expert on this, I want to ask you, because now the original Black Panthers are distancing themselves from the new Black Panthers, and the Southern Poverty Law Center is now calling these folks racist. What do you think is happening there?
Well, what's happening is a classic tactic that they've always used. They will produce a radical organization that everybody starts to reject, and then they break off another newer radical organization that's even worse than the original, to make the original look moderate. That's what's happening.
So this is the dialectic that we are witnessing right in front of us.
Exactly. Yeah. So they'll for instance form the NAACP. Then they'll form the Congress for Racial Equality, which has gotten a little better over the years, but nonetheless that's what they did. And then they'll form the Black Panther Party. Then they'll form RAM, the Revolutionary Movement. And now they've got the New Black Panther Party, always making the former one look less radical, but they're as radical as they always were. It's to get people to accept a compromise. Like you say, it's a dialectic. And so in compromising with the thing that looks more moderate, you're actually compromising with something that 2 years ago was the most radical.
Which is how we incrementally move closer and closer to tyranny, right?
These are very important things for us to understand so that we can recognize them when we see them. And there's another strategy they're using that I wonder if you could speak to. Back in the 60s, they created these citizen review boards, and those citizen review boards were back doors in the scheme for nationalizing the police. Today, even for the last couple of years, I've seen citizen review boards from people who are concerned, and people are very duped by this idea. I'm wondering if you can explain today how the citizen review boards undermine local police, but actually help create a national police force, then maybe to tell people why the citizen review boards are not a good idea.
Sure. Now the thing that people have to remember, first of all, before we get started on that, is that there are 11 distinct things that local citizens can do to take care of any situation in their local community relative to corruption or errant policemen or anything of that nature that are never mentioned in the local papers or even the national papers. Let me read what these things are. Let me state what they are.
Okay.
If you don't need outside people coming in to review what's going on, because first of all, you've got the Internal Affairs Department of the Police Department. You've got the Chief of Police. You've got the Mayor. You've got the City Council. You've got the City Attorney. You've got the County Attorney. You've got the County Commissioners. You have the State Attorney General. You've got the Governor. You've got the Legislature. And if all of those fail, guess what? You still have the ballot box. Now, if you start to promote the idea of the federal government coming in, the Department of Justice and everything else, you've lost all control over your police. It's now in the hands of the federal government, whether it's an investigation or anything else. Now, if local control is abrogated to federal control, that will create a corrupt system like you've never seen before. And let's make sure that we get this point embedded in everybody's minds, and that is there is no socialist country that doesn't have a national police force. You can't have a totalitarian government unless you have a national police force.
Right, that is a key piece.
Work.
It's a key pillar of their program. And what
would
you say to the people who say? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, finish.
I was going to say, let me illustrate how this will upset the entire structure of the government of the United States. If we have a nationalized police force or a police entity that controls all the local police forces, in other words, they may not hold federal badges, but they'll be controlled nonetheless from the federal government, Washington, D.C., that will be done either through the Department of Justice or a new bureaucracy, all under the President of the United States. That will skew the balance of power between the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch.
As if it isn't already. But Art Thompson, we're headed for a quick break here, and I wanted to bring up this idea that might be connected to what you were just saying. It's called the Strong Cities Network, and actually invoking UN support. If we could, after this break, I would like for you to speak to that and what the connection is and how this is all going to look when it comes down to our local communities. So that said, this is Sherilyn Eager and Enoch Moore. This is the Naked Truth Day of the Liberty Lineup. We're on with Art Thompson. We're talking about the nationalization of the police force. If you'd like to join us, 801-254-5855. We'll be back after this. So those were the sounds of my growing up years, and brings back memories, right? Do you feel this is more or less deja vu, but worse?
Yes, it is. You know, it's one of the things that turns people off, they tell me, is when I use the word communist, because after all, communism is dead. And, you know, we've tried to tell people, even when they were in 89 and 90 and so on and so forth. I was at the wall when it was coming down, by the way, in Berlin. I was over there on a fact-finding tour. And one of the people that I interviewed was a Communist Party member in the East German Army. He was an officer. I says, what's the plan? He says, what we're going to do is merge with West Germany, and we're going to build our strength in the new government until we're strong enough to take it over. They had no idea that communism was dead. They were just going to rename it, keep the power structure and everything else. I remind people, for instance, that when they declared communism dead, there wasn't a single communist that walked off their job in any of the communist satellite countries or Russia and said, now we're out of work, we don't run the country anymore. Not at all. They just stayed where they were, renamed themselves, and have continued on. They became a little benign to fool people because too many people were waking up as to what was going on, including this country. Mm-hmm. Now they're beginning to see it come back. But I'm glad you brought up this business with these cities.
Yeah, and Art, this is Art Thompson, by the way, with the John Birch Society, CEO. We're talking about the nationalization of police, and we will get to the Strong Cities Network, but Enoch wanted to get a little more from you about the review boards.
Yeah, we were talking about the citizen review boards, and so I understand that is a backdoor means, right, to try to nationalize the police, and the federal government will be far worse than local government, than local police corruption, is what we're saying.
That's true, but see, these are all a series of steps. The review boards and they name them all sorts of different things now. The whole idea is to create a board that's run by the community action organizations that are founded on Saul Alinsky's program. You'll have a couple of people in there who will be, show business, but the rest of them will be leftist community organizers hamstringing the police. That's one of the steps. Strong Cities Network is another step. So they've got all these various steps already in line so that the people will basically won't stand for one big step into a national police force. So they are doing it incrementally. Another thing that they're doing is you were talking about on the air, and I'm assuming that this is what you were saying, is that they're consolidating locally the police into more of a regional police.
Correct.
This is happening all over the place in Chicago, Philadelphia, and everything else. They're taking away the smaller communities and bringing them in under the control of the large metro government so that the local citizens in these independent towns and cities lose control over their own police department.
So that seems to fit in very nicely, Art, with the whole sustainable development idea of gutting the countryside and consolidating the people all in one urban locality, correct?
That's all part of it. It's all part of the plan. And so in these incremental steps that nobody seems to be able to stop and everybody does it by edict, are being consolidated, and then once they get consolidated, then they're going to be moved into larger consolidations, into larger regional governments. But at any rate, the ultimate end is not simply a national police force, because what you see buried within all the rhetoric and the reports and the studies and the seminars and the training is what we really need is an international police. And we're starting to see the idea that all international police have the same training. They will start to have visitations where our police will go over and work in Germany for a while, and the Belgian people will come over and work here for a while, and all of that. So ultimately, the socialist, the communist goal is a one-world government. And that one-world government right now is the United Nations. And so they're doing everything they can to program people into accepting an international police force, all the while they're trying to nationalize ours. You can't see, if we have independent local police departments and we go into regionalization, like the North American Union or something like that, you can't merge these local police into the federales or the Northwest Mounted Police or that kind of thing. You've got to get a system going, just like Obamacare or anything else, where we have a social entity that can be merged with their socialist entities. And if we had a national police force, it'd just be a matter of changing the badge or the patch on their sleeve. But they can't do it if we all remain independent, you see. And so they've got to put all these little things in place to make this bigger merger all across the board, including the things that you were talking about, not just the police, a lot easier to consolidate into a big government. And it's all part of a very big picture. You can find out more about it by going on our Support Your Local Police Issues page on jbs.org, and it explains the whole program there for you.
So, Art, I'm going to now what happened in Oregon, and we're pretty close to that situation because we work with the Bundys and the Finnegans and supporting what their needs are. And there was a police report that came out. I'm sure you have heard about this. And this police officer reporting on the ambush commented that they had to change the venue of that ambush from one county to another because the original county they were staged in was a UN-free zone. And we do know that that county does have such an ordinance that was passed a few years back. Is there any presence of international police or UN that you think might have been involved in that incident in Oregon?
Well, I really can't address that. The man that would be that we have that's a real expert on that is William Jasper. You're probably familiar with him.
Yes, we're trying to get him on the show. Could you help us?
Well, I'll sure try.
Yeah, that would be great.
In fact, if you send an email to our gal, that Constance, that you sent an email to get me on, we'll do everything we can.
Okay, so we'll follow up with that later. And then another thought that I am curious about. Do you think that what has happened with Brexit is merely a setback and it's a part of this dialectic? What's happening there?
Well, first of all, I don't think that, I doubt seriously that they're ever going to be able to break off. But there are two scenarios, and one of them gets pretty wild, so you've got to bear with me. But they've got 2 years to scuttle that whole Brexit thing. But why do they have to go hat in hand to the European Union and say, "Oh, pretty please, may we go our own way"? No, you just say, "We're out. Get out of here." That's the way you do it. That's how you maintain your sovereignty and your independence. You don't negotiate your independence. But there's another thing too that I would remind people if they've ever read the book 1984 by George Orwell. You remember that Oceania, just to remind your listeners, they had the world broken up into 3 huge governments, and one of them was Oceania, and that was the British Isles and the United States together, and several other places of the old English Empire. So they may be, because we see little hints that they're talking about, well, we'll go ahead with the United States with all these free trade agreements that put us into a regional government instead of being part of the European regional government. So I keep reminding myself that I read about this in George Orwell's 1984 novel. So that's a little bizarre, I know.
So it makes you wonder if they got the playbook from Orwell or...
Orwell got it from them.
Yes. Oh, well, it's a mess. Europe, I assume, is much further down the road than we are on nationalizing their police. You've mentioned that, any socialist economy has it.
There are no local police departments in Europe. Mm-hmm. They're all even in Canada, it's kind of a hybrid. They have a national wing, but in the long run, they answer to the federal government or the national government in Canada, even though they do have some local autonomy. With the Mexicans, it's the federales, So,
which way do you think? Which way do you think that Dallas police chief is going to go? He seemed to be quite at wit's end on how to solve the problems they're facing.
Well, let me say this, and I probably shouldn't say it.
It's okay.
But
this is
Texas,
the thought police-free zone here.
Texas is one of the most corrupt governments in the country. It's, you go back to Lyndon Johnson and look at the corruption that existed there, and it's still a real big problem in Texas.
Well, that's where the Bushes came from, right? And you've got Austin, which is the UN, model city, and they're one of the Google Fiber cities, one of the first, right? And
of course, we were able to stop that corridor, but we understand the corridor is now Utah.
One of them.
The corridor's all over the place. Actually, that corridor is only one small snippet of the original plan. So, the problem is that you've got a situation where they're asking the wrong questions in Dallas. I went on video the day after that happened, and I said, "Look, if you don't understand these particular things, you're not going to be asking the right questions."
What are those right questions, Art? Quickly, because we're running out of time here, and we want to...
For one thing, what about the other people that were out in the Huey P. Newton Gun Club that were marching there with guns? Did they provide cover for him? And that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And if they're not asking those questions, they're not going to get to the bottom of this. I don't think that he was a lone gunman. A lone gunman in Dallas is a nice little story, but...
Possible that the Huey Newton Gun Club was the decoy?
Yeah, well, the Huey P. Newton, of course, was a communist terrorist. He was the original head of the Black Panther Party. So, anyway, they claim him as a member.
So where do we go? Where do we go? What do we do?
Well, first of all, you've got to do everything you can to inform the local citizens of your local government, particularly as the dangers of a national police force. Start talking to your city councilman. Go to Chamber of Commerce meetings, Kiwanis, Rotary, everybody in the community that has any kind of influence at all, businessmen, and inform them as to the problems of a national police force and get them to understand how it can come about before they even realize it, and they've got it before and can't say anything more about it. They're in it.
What about educating our sheriffs and getting more to understand their constitutional authority?
Yeah, and getting candidates to run for sheriff they're constitutionalists.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah.
Art, this has been an amazing couple of segments with you. We need to have you come back again, certainly at another time.
Sure.
Do you have anything more you'd like to ask him, Enoch?
This has been good
No,
conversation.
but I would just say if they want more information on this and a lot of other things, go to jbs.org and our issues page, and you'll find out more than you wanted to know.
There you go. Well, we appreciate all you've been doing and the organization for many years. And we'll be back in touch, and we'll be sure to connect up with that William Jasper, too. Put in a good word for us. Thank you for your time. You have a great day.
Okay, thanks again. Bye.
All right.
This has been Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of DefendingUtah.org on the Naked Truth segment of the Liberty Lineup radio show on K-Talk AM 630, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Make sure to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. And also, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Gordon's Carpet Cleaning. If you want the job done right, call Gordon's Carpet Cleaning, 801-368-0140. That's 801-368-0140. We also want to let you know about the Editor Lady. She will help you publish your book or do any editing for a price you won't believe. Give the Editor Lady a call at 801-948-3667. That's 801-948-3667. Or email her at theeditorlady@gmail.com. We all know that we need to get prepared for job loss, disasters, and just plain life. You need to go to emergencyseedbank.com. That's emergencyseedbank.com. Enter coupon code DEFEND.UT to get your deep discount on Urban Emergency Seed Bank of 23 varieties of non-hybrid, non-GMO seeds, double hermetically sealed in Mylar for seeds that last for decades. emergencyseedbank.com, coupon code DEFEND.UT. Ben and Enoch will be back next Thursday from 10 to noon on K-Talk AM 630 in Salt Lake City.